I'm 47, and for the longest time I thought life was stable. Not perfect, not exciting, but safe, predictable, and bearable. I had a house in a quiet neighborhood, two kids who seemed mostly happy, a golden retriever that never stopped shedding, and a marriage that from the outside looked solid. That's what I clung to, the image of stability, the illusion that as long as nothing exploded, everything was fine. Laura, my wife, had been my partner for almost 25 years. We met when we were fresh out of college, full of ambition and convinced that love could conquer anything. She had a laugh that used to make my chest tighten with joy, and a way of looking at me like she actually cared about the man I was becoming. Back then, our world felt infinite, a canvas waiting for our fingerprints. Fast forward 2 decades and the paint had dried. We lived in routines so precise that they bordered on robotic. Weekdays blurred into weekends, conversations revolved around logistics, soccer practice, dentist appointments, grocery lists, mortgage payments, who was cooking dinner. Rarely did we talk about us. Rarely did we ask questions that mattered. I told myself that was normal, that marriages evolved from passion to partnership. I convinced myself that loyalty alone would keep us afloat. The cracks were subtle at first, so subtle I almost missed them. She began guarding her phone more carefully, turning the screen away when I walked into a room. Late-night messages would pop up and disappear before I could see them. Small changes in behavior, the way she took longer showers, lingered on errands, or disappeared for a quick walk that often lasted hours, felt negligible. I rationalized everything. Stress, work, the kids. I told myself I was imagining things, that paranoia would only ruin what little peace we had left. And then there were the laughs, those brief moments when she was genuinely happy, out of my presence, on the phone, or during a walk alone. Her expression would light up in a way I hadn't seen in years. I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. It was probably a friend, someone from work, a cousin I didn't know well. But deep down, I knew my imagination wasn't entirely at fault. The first day I realized something was seriously wrong was ordinary, painfully so. It was a Saturday morning, the kind where chores feel endless and the kids are off at sports. I returned from a grocery run, hands full of bags, and noticed the front door ajar. Strange, but not unheard of. As I stepped inside, I heard her voice, low, intimate, laughing softly. Not at me, not in jest, but genuinely, freely, in a way that stabbed me with curiosity and dread at the same time. She saw me and froze. The laughter ended abruptly. Her smile was there, but it was strained, unnatural. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just work stuff," she replied a bit too quickly. I nodded and went upstairs, pretending nothing happened, but the sound lingered. That laugh, that intimacy, that secret I couldn't touch but could sense. It sat in my chest and wouldn't leave. That night, lying beside her in the bed we had shared for decades, I stared at the ceiling. Her back was turned toward me, scrolling on her phone, a barrier between us I could feel physically. I realized then that I hadn't felt truly seen by her in years. I didn't feel like a partner. I didn't feel like someone she needed or even noticed beyond the routines we had built. It scared me more than I cared to admit. The following weeks were torturous. I tried rationalizing. Maybe it really was just a friend. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I had been inattentive and her happiness elsewhere didn't mean she wanted to leave me. But the doubt was relentless, and the distance I felt, already subtle, grew like a shadow I couldn't shake. Finally, I found the courage to confront her, gently, without accusation. "Laura, is there someone else?" I asked one evening. She paused, blinking, caught off guard. I saw the brief flicker in her eyes, the hesitation, the guilt, the reality she had been avoiding. "It's complicated," she said finally. I don't know how to explain." Her confession came slowly, in pieces. Emotional distance, a year of secret conversations with someone at work, the feeling of being unseen. She insisted nothing physical had happened, though she admitted the emotional attachment was deep.
She said she felt alive in ways she hadn't in years. She told me she didn't mean to hurt me. I listened. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just listened, and with each word, a part of me broke quietly. In the weeks that followed, we tried counseling. 3 sessions. We both spoke politely, hiding the storm inside. The counselor asked questions about communication, unmet needs, feelings, and expectations. Laura framed herself as lonely, misunderstood, trapped in the monotony of life. I was the steady provider who didn't excite her, didn't notice her needs. Eventually, she said it out loud. "I don't think I've been in love with you in a long time." It was said without malice, without anger, just a flat truth she had carried inside her for months, maybe years. And in that moment, I realized something critical. I couldn't fix this. I couldn't pull us back from the edge. I couldn't beg. I couldn't reason. I couldn't plead. So I stopped trying. The divorce that followed was calm, almost surreal in its quietness. Papers signed, schedules arranged, custody divided. She moved into a small apartment across town. The kids stayed with me more than half the time. We spoke less about feelings and more about logistics. The first night alone in the house, I sat on the edge of the bed. I had expected rage or despair or heartbreak so sharp that it would keep me awake for weeks. Instead, I felt clarity. For the first time in years, I knew where I stood. I wasn't being lied to anymore. I wasn't living a half-truth. I wasn't imagining shadows or questioning myself endlessly. I was free, in a sense, even if that freedom was painful. I cried quietly that night, not for Laura, not for the marriage, but for the life I thought I had and the realization that it was gone. And as I sat there, staring at the walls of our shared home, I felt the faintest spark of possibility. Perhaps this ending wasn't the end at all. Perhaps it was the beginning of a life I hadn't dared to imagine.
The weeks after Laura moved out were a strange mix of emptiness and clarity. I went through the motions of daily life, work, errands, picking up the kids, but something had shifted inside me. The routines that once felt comforting now felt hollow. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant car passing by reminded me of what had been lost. And yet, I no longer felt paralyzed by fear or grief. For the first time in years, I felt aware, awake in a way that I hadn't been when I was clinging to a life that was only a facade. It was during one of those nights that I faced the truth fully. I had been helping my daughter with a school project when Laura called unexpectedly. It was late and the kids were asleep. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity, an unhealthy mix of dread and need, won over. "Hi," I said cautiously. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice trembling. The words themselves were ordinary, but the weight behind them was enormous. I agreed to meet her the following evening at a small diner halfway between our homes. Neutral territory, I told myself, a place where emotions might be somewhat contained. Sitting across from her, I noticed the changes immediately. She seemed smaller somehow, quieter. Her eyes avoided mine at first, and when they met, I saw guilt, regret, and fear all tangled together. I made mistakes," she said, finally. "A lot of mistakes. I wasn't honest with you, and I hurt you deeply. I wanted, I don't know, something different, I guess." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands for a moment. I listened. I had questions, many of them, but I wanted clarity more than I wanted confrontation. I wanted to understand, not to tear apart what little piece I had started to reclaim. "Did it mean something? Was there someone else?" I asked quietly. She nodded slightly, biting her lip. "There was someone, but it wasn't what you think. Nothing physical happened, but emotionally, I was gone, for a long time." She described the connection she had formed with a coworker, someone who listened, someone who made her feel alive when I didn't or couldn't. She spoke of feeling trapped, invisible, and unfulfilled,
and how that led her to make choices that shattered our life. And as she spoke, I felt something unexpected. Not rage, not bitterness, just sadness. Deep, quiet, heavy sadness. Not for the loss of her, but for the realization that we had both failed. I had been blind to her unhappiness. I had assumed that stability equaled contentment, and she had sought life outside of us instead of fighting for us. After hours of conversation, I left the diner with more understanding than I expected. My heart ached, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I knew somewhere deep down that our marriage wasn't perfect, that we had been growing apart, but facing the betrayal, hearing it out loud, it was jarring. It hurt, but it was real. In the days that followed, I began to reclaim my space, physically, mentally, emotionally. I reorganized the house, cleaned closets I hadn't touched in years, even found old journals where I had once poured my thoughts about life, love, and ambition. Reading them made me realize how much of myself I had neglected. I started therapy the following week. Sitting in that office, talking to a professional was both terrifying and liberating. I wasn't used to admitting my vulnerability. I wasn't used to exploring feelings of failure, loneliness, and grief without trying to fix everything. But therapy became my refuge. I talked about Laura, about the betrayal, about my fears of being unlovable, of starting over at my age. I talked about the kids, the house, the life I had built that now felt fragile. The therapist didn't judge. She didn't provide easy solutions. She just guided me, asked questions I hadn't dared to ask myself. "Who are you beyond your marriage?" she asked during one session. I had no answer at first. For years, my identity had been tied to my role as husband and father, the provider, the man who kept life running smoothly. But now, I realized I was more than that. I was someone capable of growth, of change, of choosing himself over a life that no longer served him. I started small, cooking proper meals again, exercising, reconnecting with old friends I had drifted from, even spending quiet mornings with just coffee and the newspaper. These little actions reminded me that I still existed outside of Laura, outside of the marriage, outside of the life that almost suffocated me. And then, slowly, life started to feel like something I could participate in again, not just survive. One evening, while walking the dog through a park near my house, I realized I was noticing things I hadn't in years. The smell of damp grass after a rain, the sound of children laughing in the distance, the warmth of the sunset touching the horizon. I was present. I was alive. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the world might be capable of surprise. That realization gave me courage. I knew I wasn't ready for romance. I knew that I would need time, patience, and trust before anyone could enter my life again. But I also knew something else. I deserved happiness, not a version of it tied to what I had lost, but my own. I began to make a list, not a literal list, but a mental one, of the things I wanted in life moving forward, things that would nourish me, challenge me, and make me feel alive, things that had nothing to do with being a husband, but everything to do with being myself. It wasn't easy. Each day presented its own challenges. I wrestled with moments of regret, flashes of anger, and sometimes crushing loneliness. But slowly, the emotional fog began to lift. I began to reclaim parts of myself I hadn't seen in decades. And that's when I realized the most important truth. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about embracing the present and choosing a future that belongs to you. For the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I could be happy again, on my own terms.
It happened gradually, almost imperceptibly. After months of solitude, therapy, and small but deliberate acts of self-care, I began noticing things I hadn't paid attention to in years. a sunrise over the park on my morning walks, the rhythm of rain tapping against the windows, the way my son laughed while chasing the dog through the yard. Life was happening outside of my grief, and slowly I allowed myself to see it. Then I met her. Her name was Sophie. I first saw her at a small local bookstore, a quaint place with mismatched chairs, shelves packed with dog-eared novels, and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. I was wandering aimlessly, picking up books I didn't plan to buy, when I noticed she was reading the same author I had been holding. I made a casual comment. "Good choice," I said. She looked up, startled for a moment, then smiled genuinely. "Yeah," she said. "It's one of those books that hits differently after 40. We laughed softly. Nothing flirtatious, nothing dramatic, just two people recognizing shared tastes, a small bridge of familiarity forming between strangers. We ran into each other again the following week, and the week after that. Each encounter felt effortless, as though time had slowed to accommodate our conversations. We talked about the author, our favorite chapters, and eventually about life, quietly, without pressure, without expectation. She was divorced too, her children older than mine, and she had a warmth and patience that immediately felt comforting. I realized that I was starting to care about someone again, and that scared me. For years, my identity had been tied to a marriage that no longer existed. My heart had been closed off, sealed against disappointment, betrayal, and the bitter lessons of love lost. To allow someone else in, even tentatively, felt like exposing a wound I thought had only just begun to heal. But Sophie wasn't pressing. She didn't demand closeness. She simply existed alongside me, patient, gentle, unthreatening. She shared her own stories, small moments of loss, growth, and rediscovery, and I found myself responding in kind, slowly peeling away layers I had built for self-protection. One Saturday afternoon, we decided to take a walk through the old park near the river. The air was crisp, the sunlight dappled through bare winter branches, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of calm. Not excitement, not thrill, just calm. "I like this," she said, smiling. "Just walking, no distractions. Feels honest." I nodded. "Yeah, it's grounding. I forgot how much I needed that." As we walked, I noticed the simple joy of shared silence, the way her presence alone felt reassuring. And I realized something important. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to compare this to the past. I didn't need to force emotions that might not be ready to bloom. For the first time, I understood that love could be gentle, patient, and still real. The turning point came one evening over coffee at her apartment. We were talking about childhood memories, our mistakes, and the strange paths life takes. I laughed at a story she told, and she laughed back, her eyes lighting up in that way that reminded me how easy it could be to connect with someone. And then, almost without thinking, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers with mine, a simple act that felt monumental. I didn't need fireworks, I didn't need passion or intensity. Just that small human connection reminded me that I could trust myself to feel again. Weeks passed, and our friendship grew naturally into something deeper. I began introducing Sophie to small aspects of my life. My children noticed her, but she didn't attempt to replace their mother, only to be kind and present. She learned their favorite games, remembered details about their lives, and earned their trust. And slowly, I began to feel whole in a way I hadn't thought possible. The healing wasn't linear. There were nights when I was reminded of Laura, when old regrets and bitterness would creep in. Nights when I questioned if I was moving too fast or if I deserved happiness again. But Sophie never pressured me, never judged, never forced me to answer questions I wasn't ready to ask myself. One day, sitting on a bench overlooking the river,
I realized that I was smiling for no reason at all, just because I could, because life, in its unpredictable, messy way, was giving me another chance, and I had the courage to take it. It wasn't just about Sophie either. It was about me, about finally choosing to live fully, to embrace joy, to accept that I could be loved and cared for again, about recognizing that the past, though painful, had taught me resilience, patience, and self-respect. And in that moment, I understood the true meaning of growth. It's not about forgetting heartbreak, it's about learning from it, letting it shape you without letting it define you. It's about reclaiming your life, your heart, and your sense of possibility. Sophie and I didn't rush. We didn't label our relationship immediately. We let things unfold organically, quietly, without the chaos and drama that had characterized my previous marriage. And in that space of calm honesty, I realized something vital. Happiness doesn't have to be loud or explosive. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and enduring. And that's exactly what makes it real. By the time spring arrived, I was no longer the man who had felt trapped in routine, betrayed, and lost. I had begun to rebuild myself, piece by piece, and along the way, I discovered that life still had surprises, still had warmth, still had moments that could make your heart expand in ways you didn't think possible after loss. And more importantly, I realized that I was capable of loving again. Not recklessly, not desperately, but fully, gently, and on my own terms.
Just when I had started to feel steady, the past knocked on the door. It came in the form of Laura, my ex-wife, calling late one evening. The kids were with her for the weekend, and I was finishing dinner with Sophie. I hesitated before answering, heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt in months, not from fear, but from a flicker of uncertainty. "Can we talk?" Laura asked, her voice softer than I remembered. I took a deep breath and agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe we used to go to years ago, a neutral space, somewhere between familiarity and distance. When I arrived, she was already there, eyes tired, face lined with regret. It was surreal to see her like this, no longer the woman I had spent decades with, but someone smaller, quieter, someone who made choices that broke our lives. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. I thought I needed something else, someone else, but I realized what I had lost. Us, our family, you. Her words were slow, deliberate, weighted with shame. She wasn't trying to manipulate me. She wasn't pleading. She was simply stating a truth she had arrived at too late. For a moment, I felt the old ache in my chest, the betrayal, the loss, the countless nights I had lain awake wondering what went wrong. But this time, it was tempered by the calm I had built with Sophie, the self-respect I had reclaimed, and the understanding that my happiness no longer depended on Laura's choices. "I'm sorry you're hurting, but I'm not the same man you left behind." She blinked, uncertain, her hands twisting in her lap. I could see the apology etched into every line of her face, but there was no longer room for reconciliation in my heart. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I had already chosen another path. A path of respect, patience, and growth. We talked for nearly an hour. She asked if there was a chance we could try again, if we could salvage something from what we had lost. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg or argue. I simply said what I had known for weeks, maybe months. I don't want to go backward. Even if it feels familiar, it's not what I want anymore. I left that cafe feeling lighter than I expected. Not because I had rejected her, but because I had affirmed myself. I had chosen my future rather than being pulled back into a past that had caused me pain. When I got home, I told Sophie everything. I expected hesitation, confusion, maybe even doubt. Instead, she listened, calmly, without judgment, and then she said something that struck me profoundly.
I don't want to be your rebound. I don't want to compete with the past. I just want to be here, if you want me." Her words weren't dramatic. They didn't promise fairy tale endings, but they reminded me of the kind of love I had been missing. Patient, honest, and grounded in reality. From that moment, I stopped holding back. I introduced Sophie to the kids gradually, carefully, respecting the space they needed. She never tried to replace their mother. Instead, she earned their trust through kindness, consistency, and genuine interest in their lives. Slowly, my children warmed to her, and in seeing the way they smiled in her presence, I realized how far I had come. It wasn't a perfect transition. There were moments of jealousy, fear, and doubt, nights when I wondered if I was moving too fast, or if I was betraying the memory of my old marriage by embracing new happiness. But those nights were shorter, easier to manage, because I had built a foundation of trust with Sophie, not just in her, but in myself. I also realized something else. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, excusing, or pretending the past didn't hurt. Forgiveness is about releasing the weight that keeps you from moving forward. I forgave Laura, not for her sake, but for mine. I let go of resentment, because holding on to it only prevented me from seeing the life I could have now. By the time summer arrived, Sophie and I were inseparable in the ways that mattered. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet moments, cooking together, reading in the living room, sharing walks with the dog. The ordinary things felt extraordinary because I was fully present, fully alive, and fully willing to embrace happiness without reservation. The final test came one afternoon when Laura called again, asking to speak to the kids about an upcoming school trip. Sophie and I handled it together, calmly, without tension. Seeing our ability to navigate that situation peacefully, without jealousy, without fear, was proof that we had grown. We weren't just surviving the past, we were thriving despite it. And in that moment, I realized something essential. Life demands perfection. It only demands courage. The courage to leave what no longer serves you, the courage to embrace new possibilities, and the courage to open your heart when it's ready. Sophie and I didn't rush. We didn't define labels or timelines. We simply allowed trust, love, and respect to grow naturally, day by day, until it became undeniable. And in the quiet of our shared lives, I finally felt peace, the kind that comes not from certainty, but from choosing consciously, intentionally, and fully.
By the time autumn arrived, my life felt different. Not perfect, not cinematic, not the kind of story people write novels about, but real, tangible, alive, and most importantly, mine. Sophie and I had settled into a rhythm that was steady, peaceful, and full of small joys. We didn't need dramatic gestures or constant excitement. Our happiness was rooted in the ordinary. Shared mornings with coffee, evenings spent cooking, long walks with the kids and the dog, the quiet hum of everyday life that once seemed meaningless. The kids had grown to like her genuinely, not just because I had wanted them to, but because she had earned their trust. She remembered their favorite books, listened patiently when they spoke about school or friends, and even helped them with their projects without making it feel like a chore. Watching her interact with them, I realized how much healing had happened, not just for me, but for the whole family. I also noticed the subtle changes within myself. I smiled more often. I laughed without hesitation. I didn't wake up with that heavy knot in my chest. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was participating in life. And I could see that Sophie had been a catalyst for that change, not because she fixed me, but because she helped me trust myself again. One evening as we sat on the back porch, the air crisp and tinged with the smell of falling leaves, I realized just how far I had come. We were silent for a while, listening to the faint sounds of the neighborhood winding down. The dog lay at our feet, content. The kids had gone to bed after an evening of homework and laughter. The world felt calm, and for the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of gratitude.
I can't believe how quiet it is here, Sophie said softly, leaning back in her chair. I chuckled. It's nice, isn't it? I never realized how much I missed this. She smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. You've come a long way. I nodded. I have, and I couldn't have done it without you. It wasn't a declaration of love in the grand, dramatic sense. It was quiet, honest, a recognition of the bond we had formed and the journey we had taken together. It was real, and real felt better than anything I had experienced before. A few weeks later, we decided to take a short trip together, just the two of us, a break from routines, from reminders of the past. Driving along the coast, windows down, wind in our hair, I felt a freedom I hadn't known in decades. The sun dipped low over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time, I didn't think about what I had lost. I didn't think about mistakes, betrayals, or regrets. I only felt present. We stayed at a small inn, simple but cozy, with the kind of view that reminded you the world is bigger than your worries. At night, we sat on the balcony, sipping tea, and shared our hopes for the future. No promises, no pressure, just honest conversation and mutual understanding. It was during that trip that I realized something essential. Happiness isn't found in grand gestures or dramatic resolutions. It's found in consistency, in honesty, in shared trust, and in the willingness to open yourself again after loss. When we returned, I introduced Sophie to more of my life. Friends, extended family, routines. Each step was careful, intentional, but it all felt natural. I didn't feel guilt, nor did I feel fear. I felt complete. And then came my birthday, a quiet afternoon with the kids, Sophie, and a few close friends. She handed me a small gift, wrapped neatly. Inside was a watch, simple and elegant, engraved with the words, "Chosen, every day." I sat in silence for a moment, overwhelmed, not with emotion that needed to explode, but with the profound peace of knowing I had been seen, respected, and chosen. I looked at Sophie, and she smiled. "I mean it," she said softly. "Every day, you're chosen." And in that moment, I understood something deeply. Love, true love, doesn't always arrive with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly, steadily, with patience and respect. Sometimes it's calm, and sometimes it's exactly what you need. The following months were full of ordinary joys, Sunday mornings with pancakes and laughter, evening walks that stretched into quiet nights, long conversations over tea, time spent with the kids, each moment reinforcing the bonds that had begun to heal. Life was no longer about survival. It was about living, fully and intentionally. I often thought about the past, the marriage, the betrayal, the emptiness I had endured. I didn't resent it, and I didn't dwell on it. It had shaped me, taught me resilience, and ultimately guided me towards this life, a life I had chosen consciously, one that felt authentic and sustainable. By the time winter came, I realized that I hadn't just survived heartbreak. I had grown stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I had learned that endings aren't failures, they are openings. Openings to new possibilities, new love, and new versions of yourself. Sophie and I didn't need validation from the world. Our happiness wasn't loud or performative. It was quiet, steady, and real. And in that quiet, I found the most profound joy I had ever known. The knowledge that I had chosen myself, my heart, and my future, and that I could love again without fear. Life hadn't gone perfectly, and it never would. But for the first time in decades, I felt whole. I felt seen. I felt alive. And in that, I found my happy ending. Not in someone else, not in a fantasy, but in the life I had rebuilt, the love I had nurtured, in the man I had become. I had lost much, but I had also gained everything that truly mattered.